All right, I'm going to start tackling this Quadrajet on the Olds 88. I've decided the car runs so well, I'm just going to try taking the top off and replacing the needle and seat because it's easier and I can do this pretty quickly. So tools that you're going to need: a bucket for all your parts, a little eyeglass screwdriver or a punch for the accelerator pump, a 1/2-inch socket, a flat blade magnetic screwdriver, the one that you've magnetized, a little pick, and I might need a few more. So I've obviously removed the air cleaner, but the next step is I'm going to get this vacuum line off back here, and I kind of use this pick to go in here and break the seal so I can get it off more easily. And here it comes. That's for the choke thermostat. I'm going to also need some other stuff, I think. Then I've got one more vacuum hose here that I'm going to try to pick off. There it goes. There we go. I should say the first step is to take a lot of pictures in case you forget how these things go on, which I've already done. Then I'm going to remove the air cleaner mounting stud, I guess I'll call it. Next step is going to be getting these screws off of the choke pull off. And when you turn screws that have been tight for a long time, again, quick, firm blows as opposed to twisting with continuous pressure. So there we go. Some of these have been in here for a long time, obviously. This is 100% unrehearsed, for better or worse. And be careful, you don't want to lose these screws. So now that's disconnected from the top part of the carburetor. Also going to remove this clip that holds the choke rod in. So you can see this activates a mechanism that's associated with the hot air choke so that when the motor's cold and you step on the gas, this choke flap closes, and then as the motor warms, this bimetallic spring, which I've described in some other videos, is going to uncoil and it will open this choke. So the purpose of this is to increase the fuel to air mixture or decrease the air fuel mixture. So fuel is tough to atomize at cold temperatures, so you need more fuel to air. And when you block off air, you're going to get more fuel. So this is the same principle as what's on a lawnmower or other things where they have a choke. It's just manually operated on those versus this bimetallic spring governs it once you step on the accelerator. And there's two screws down in here that I'm going to have to remove, which are kind of annoying with this thing putting tension and blocking my way. So a trick there is to, this is the throttle, hold the throttle open, push this butterfly down, release the throttle, and now it'll stay open. You can see if I were to step on the gas again, it snaps closed. So again, hold that open, depress the accelerator, let go of the accelerator, let go of it, and it's going to stay open and allow you to get those two screws and also provide you some, I would say, safety net in the event you drop one of those, because the throttle blades are going to be closed now. But there is a screw here that holds this on. I'm going to have to get actually going to we go. I closed this choke so that I could use its stop as a place to open this. I'm going to reopen it again so I wasn't turning against the fast idle cam. Okay, so this piece actually just comes loose now on here, so this can stay open. This rod, by the way, is probably the least fun part to get this hooked back in once you get the top back on. Got to have a little flashlight, and you kind of get good at it with practice. You can see this is moving as I move that rod. Now there are just a bunch of perimeter screws and these 2 1/2-inch bolts that you want to take off in alternating order. So I'm going to do that. And I should also, before I get all of these screws out, this model, I'm admittedly not sure what this is covering here. This screw in the front. I guess I'll find out. These screws are all the same length. I should say, all of these intermediate screws are the same length. These back screws are the long ones. On Ford, this screw is different from all the rest. And it has a flat head. And I'm also going to, before I go too far, take out the secondary metering rods here that are just held in place by this little screw. So there's your secondary metering rods. Boy, I can tell this carburetor is going to be varnished up. It's got gas residue on here and it's sticky like syrup. So I will clean that off. By the way, those secondary rods move up and down as these back venturi open. You can see this little thing that they were stuck on rises when this opens. So as you step on the gas and you use more and more throttle, these are going to open, and those secondary rods are going to pull out of the jets that they're in and allow more fuel in. There's a little cam on here that this rests on. So now we just keep going around the outside of the carburetor, getting these. I've done the back two, so I'm going to loosen these just to take some tension off of it. One other thing I forgot on this is I need to push or punch out this little pin, this roll pin on the accelerator pump so that I can unhook it. As I said, you're getting an unrehearsed demo, so I'm remembering how to do this along the way. Not something I do every day, but I've done many times. You just tap on this, and you only want to tap on it really until you get to the point where this will release so that you can get this out. I'm going to have to get a different tool, so give me a minute and I'll be right back. So there we go, I've punched this out. Now this is loose and separated. One tip is don't punch this roll pin all the way out so that it's touching the carburetor body. What I like to do is I just put a very thin blade screwdriver behind it to stop it from touching it, and then I just keep tapping until this springs off, which it did. So now that's done. If you want to be more crude, you don't have to punch the roll pin out. You can just bend this linkage and take it out, but this is the better way to do it. So now this is the accelerator pump. It squirts fuel in there when you step on the gas quickly. On the GMs, this is activated when you push the throttle down directly. On Fords, like the Motorcraft 4 barrels, there's a spring that basically holds the accelerator pump in place, and when you step on the gas, it releases a retainer, and the spring is what forces it down. So it's a lot less positive action on the Fords than on the GMs. So now I'm back to getting the rest of these screws out. And you can use a power drill if you want. I would not recommend a power drill putting these in, or to first loosen them. Once you've broken the seal, so to speak, you want something to help you spin them out. I suppose you can do that. I would much prefer just doing it like this. By the way, these Quadrajets did change in design over the years a number of times. So you'll see some that have a little bracket in this area where I am right now. You also want to check to make sure these secondary air doors spring back closed. If they don't, there's a spring underneath here that's broken. And if that doesn't work, then they'll get a bog, or it'll bog out on you when you first step on the gas. So I now have all of those. I'm left with these two fun ones in here. And again, this is where a magnetic screwdriver helps immensely to get these out. And there's that. Now I think I've got just these two. And I think that that is it. So I will take one more look around here before I start tapping. These are off and on here pretty good just from the age and years. But I've got those out, all the intermediate screws out. Check on this other side. Here's all those are out. So now you kind of have to whack this a little bit to get it to budge. And it's been sitting this long, so you can kind of tap lightly in different places. You really don't want to pry. And eventually this will come off. So give me a minute and I will keep working on this. Just be patient. Tap in different places. Don't tap hard, or you'll break these little bosses off, but you can tap in different places and it'll come off eventually here. Okay, well I spent about 10 minutes tapping and tapping with the hammer and was about to give up and say that I was gonna just take the whole carburetor off, which may still do anyway. And I tried my little last resort, which is to use this very thick screwdriver, and you can pry up here on the choke mechanism and this boss that's extending. You don't want to pry hard. But back to the lesson that I've taught a number of times, you kind of stick this under here, and if you give it a couple quick jabs, I did that twice and it popped right off. So now this top is loose and I can get everything off, and and I can go from there. So I'm going to stop for dinner and then to be continued. Okay, so I took the top off. You can see the air horn and this gasket is just totally done. Crispy, if you will. I have to put a new one on. This is the power piston, and this is something that I don't know. It looks like an extra enrichment circuit, interestingly, but the way to get these out, you can see they hold in place with a little plastic collar, and if you go like this and kind of push on them a number of times, watch, kind of let them spring under their own tension, it'll come out. It's coming. Whoop, there it goes. So I did that to this. These are the metering rods, the primary metering rods. And this is some sort of an enrichment rod or something that you usually don't see on these. It's a little phenolic block that you just take out. And now here's the float. And this is where the needle and seat are underneath here. So you don't want to lose those springs. I'm lucky that one didn't go flying too far. So that's the float. Rides up and down. You can see the gas in the chamber here. This is the accelerator pump. It sits in this well that pushes down and squirts. See it? See it bubble the gas out? This is, oh, that is definitely old. That rubber cup is not supposed to look like that. So this one's not working very well, but the carburetor kits come with those. And you just put a new one on. So I'm going to take this float out that just sits in here. You just pull up and the float comes out and the needle comes out. And I will keep going. I'm gonna put some gloves on my hands. You don't want to be handling raw gas with your hands. Do as I say, not as I do. So I'm going to go put some nitrile gloves on. Alright, so day 2 here of this carburetor rebuild. Cleaned off the air horn, sprayed carburetor cleaner through all these different passages. So that should be good to go. And I've cleaned out the float bowl, any debris in the middle here. So that should be good to go. Sprayed all the passages and the holes and everything. By the way, when you do that, make sure you wear safety glasses because you'll get some carburetor cleaner spraying back at you, and don't wear a nice set of clothes either. So that's all clear. Put on the new Accelerator Pump Cup. Here is the old one. It's brittle and shrunk. You know, the carburetor kits now are getting worse and worse. They used to give you this whole accelerator pump in the kit. Then they gave you the rod, but without the spring, and you had to transfer the spring. And now all they give you is that. So unfortunately, it's making it a bit harder for first-time hobbyists because the parts that you get are just crappier and crappier. And this is a Walker fuel system repair kit, so it's a name brand kit. They also don't give you the little spring clip for the needle anymore. So you have to transfer it from the old one. In any event, that's what the accelerator pump looks like that I'll be putting in. And here's the original needle. And you'll be able to see the issue this car had. There is no tip. That rubber end should be coming to a sharp point. And there is no point. It's just a blunt, flat end. So this is often what I see in some of these needles that are old. By the way, this is the only thing that stops gas from flowing into the carburetor is the weight of this little needle on its own, you know, in conjunction with the float. Carburetors only operate at about 5 or 6 psi, which for comparison purposes, if you turn your garden hose on, that's about 35, well, probably about 40 psi. So an eighth of the pressure of a garden hose. And if this doesn't work, or this doesn't block the fuel off appropriately, then gas starts flowing into the carburetor, it floods out, or if it sticks, you don't get gas coming in. But these are not high pressure items. Carburetors and throttle body injection operate on mid to high single-digit PSI. Multi-port fuel injection, which came after it, operated on around 35 PSI. And today's cars with direct injection operate at sometimes a couple thousand PSI. So this is just a low pressure system, which is why you can get away with rubber hoses and things like that, because there's not much pressure, especially ahead of the fuel pump. There's really not much pressure in the system. But I thought I'd show this. This is what the original looks like. So that's clearly bad. And the new one, if I can find it in the kit, is right here. And you want to be careful not to damage the black tip as you install it. But look how pointy that tip is. That's what it's supposed to look like. So that just sits in that little pocket right here called the seat and blocks off the fuel. So I will get back to reinstalling this, and I'll talk about some of the less fun points of probably, and also why mechanics probably hated some of these. The years for these Quadrajets, it's interesting, as the years went by, there's slight differences. I haven't had one with this. They all have this primary metering rods that you see here. And by the way, you can look on here, there's a little number. This one says 42J. I don't know if you're probably not going to be able to see it on camera, but it's etched into the rod. That's the rod size. So you can change the rod size, and notice how they're tapered to a fine tip at the end. So these sit in two jets or two holes, and as you accelerate, they pull out of the hole and allow more gas to flow in. So you can buy different rods with different diameters, different tapers. And on these cars that were made during this period where a lot of the automakers were trying to run leaner mixtures, these rods are a bit thicker than normal. So these are 42J. You might replace these with a 40J, which would be slightly smaller. And you'll get better performance. Honestly, probably about the same fuel mileage. But one thing you got to be careful about these in the Quadrajets is not bending these tips. And they're kind of tricky to get back in. It's almost a blind job on these years as opposed to my 69 Eldorado, because you have to put them into the holes that you see on this phenolic block, but you almost can't see in the carburetor where the jet is, or sorry, where the primary rod is going into the jet. So you kind of have to gently, very gently, just push around and try to get them located into the jet. Then once you do, you'll feel it kind of lower, and then you have to push this plastic collar back on that you see here to get it to stay secure. So that's one job that's not fun. And the other job that's not fun is hooking the choke mechanism back up with the little arm over here and fishing in that well for the little lever. So there's a couple things on these that kind of stink, but they are good carburetors. They're just not as easy to service as an Edelbrock or a Holley or something, especially once they start getting these emissions things in there. But we'll get back at it. All right, so now time to put the float back in. I'm going to reuse the old float because it's actually in stellar condition, right? Because this car sat with no gas in the float bowl for a long time. So when you do this, give me 1 minute and I'll show on the camera. You want to hook the needle onto this middle part, not in the holes that are on the float, and just have it hanging there. And then go and drop it in the little pocket. Be gentle, you don't want to damage the black tip. And this is something that sometimes requires a few tries to get. So take your time. Put on some music, enjoy yourself. Again, probably a feature that didn't endear these Quadrajets to rebuilders. There it goes. So drop that. There it is. It's in. So you want to leave that, and now is going to come the more fun part. Put this block over top that holds the float in and everything. Now I've got to get the primary metering rods and that little enrichment rod in there. And again, this is something I'm probably going to turn the camera off for, because it's going to take me, I would guess, 10 minutes, maybe more. But you want to just put these rods and be very gentle. These tips are soft. Gently in here. And what you're going to have to do is kind of poke around, get this collar. I'd actually get this collar in position. There we go. And you're going to have to poke around trying to find the hole. Oh, I got lucky. I think I just got lucky. So, maybe not. In any event, you're going to have to poke around and find the hole here that the jets go in, and when you do, then you can push that collar down. No, I didn't get lucky. Wishful thinking. So you just kind of dance around here gently until the tips of the metering rods find the holes of the jet. One technique that I'm probably going to use to get this to work is get a flashlight, small flashlight, put it in my mouth, crawl in the radiator cradle, and stare in here, see if I can locate the jets a bit better, so that I don't do this, doesn't take forever to try to do this, because otherwise you'll be sitting here for some time. So this is one of the least fun parts of the job, but just, again, be gentle and kind of wiggle these metering rods around, trying to find the holes that they go in, and eventually you'll get it. It may take 10 or 15 minutes, that's just how it is. Turn on some music and enjoy yourself. So I'm gonna get at that, and then I'll start refilming. Okay, so I got it in, and you can see now it took me about 5 minutes, but I had this light shining in here, kind of looking through the different holes. This is the worst part. I don't know if it's the worst, it might be close to the worst part of the job, is reinstalling these metering rods. Certainly not easy. For whatever reason this year, this phenolic block goes around the metering rods. In the earlier years, this is an easy job because this is cut out. I've seen some people cut this phenolic block out so that you don't have to do what I just did. I honestly don't know if that works or not, or I like to think the engineers had a reason that it looked like this, but maybe they didn't have a great one. So I leave it as is and just spend 5 minutes messing around with it. So now I'm going to do the same procedure to what I can only guess is a little enrichment circuit on here. By the way, once you get these in, you just tap the little collar in with your fingernail, and then you can, if you want, use a small screwdriver and just gently tap it down further to seat it. But that's all that holds that in. So you can see now this goes up and down as it should in the jet holes. So as at idle or at closed throttle, these are all the way down and the metering rods are in the jets, basically blocking off a lot of the gasoline. And as you step on the gas pedal more and more, this just rises and lets more gas in. So that's why you can put different metering rods on here and get different levels of richness or leanness as you want. But take your time on this step of the job. This is this, and then the choke rod that goes in this hole at the end when you put the air horn back on. Those are my least favorite steps in this job. But make it part of your Zen moment for the day. I actually did have to physically crawl and put my knees on the radiator support to lean in here and do this. You can try doing it, not doing that, but it's the only way I could get visibility into where those holes were to make this a bit shorter of a job. But it took me 5 minutes, and I've probably rebuilt, I don't know, 10 of these carburetors, so it'll take a little time, especially if it's your first time. Just be patient. Okay, both of those are now back in, so you can see they're in. This one I got lucky, took me only about a minute. So on to the next step, which is now putting the air horn back on and a new gasket on the air horn, along with the accelerator pump, which is going to sit there. And I like to lubricate that little accelerator pump well with some oil or WD-40 just to start, so that that rubber cup isn't riding in something that's dry. So I'll do that. I'll start putting the air horn back together and we'll go from there. All right, so I had to take a detour to my local Napa store because this gasket, which came with the carburetor kit, that was supposed to decode with the carburetor number that's over here, 7045251, stamped right there, is the wrong gasket. And I've looked online, and apparently the Walker and standard high grade kits for this car don't have the right gasket. So this is what this one looks like, and you can see it doesn't have the cutout for this little enrichment. I'm going to call it an enrichment circuit, and this is in the wrong place for that. It actually doesn't fit if you put this on the dowel pins. You can see it's misfitting. So this is the right gasket. So I had to go to a Napa store that was about 20 miles away to get this, so that I could do this. By the way, this gasket just tucks in. You bend it down and it tucks in underneath the primary metering rods like that on the front, and then you tuck it in on the back too. So I got that, and I just thought I'd give everybody a tip. By the way, this Napa carburetor kit is much better than the Walker kit that I got. It even includes the full accelerator pump, so I don't have to reuse the entire rod from mine, which is kind of annoying. The other thing that's annoying on the new carburetor kits is on these seats, they don't cut the slot big enough to use a big flat blade screwdriver. It's like a thin slot. So I'm not getting any endorsement money, but you want a carburetor kit, go to Napa. Same price. I think this was $23, and versus a Walker or standard. See, here's what accelerator pumps. This is a whole new pump, and with this other kit, I was going to have to reuse this and just put the new cup on. So this is much better. You can see I transferred, the blue cup is new, but I had to reuse this old accelerator pump. This one I do have to transfer the spring, but I get everything else new. So this is better. So a little plug for Napa on these, but I wanted everybody to be aware that this can happen. One of the joys of working on old cars when you don't get the right parts. So now back to work. Okay, so now the gasket is on. Now we'll get back to putting the air horn on. All right, so now time to put the top air horn back on. And the first thing you're going to have to do is reconnect the rod from the choke pull off here in here. So there we go, that was easy. Now you want to be very careful and make sure, I'm going to go to the other side. First thing I have to do though is put in my accelerator pump. Which goes here. There we go. So make sure that the spring and the cup are in here. So that's on. Now what you want to do is make sure that this accelerator pump goes in its little hole. And line up those little bottom air tubes on the air horn with the passages here, and don't press hard. It gently, you saw how gentle it was. This is now together and back on. So now I'm ready to secure the air horn in the screws. That is an easy part. Really the only challenging pieces left are I'm going to secure the screws on the air horn, put the secondary metering rods back on, re-hook up the accelerator pump, which I just have to push the roll pin backward. And then the last fun part's going to be hooking up this choke butterfly to the mechanism here, the fast idle cam. That sometimes can be a not so fun job and take a little while. I'm admittedly going to crawl, put my knees on the radiator, hold a flashlight with my mouth to fish that back in there. So these are excellent carburetors. I can understand why some mechanics don't like them. They've got some tricks to it, but you know, you do this a few times and it really is a great carburetor. This is an 800 CFM carburetor. You know, people put a 650 Holly or something on here, or Edelbrock. This is a much bigger carburetor, and it actually is really good for fuel economy. So I try to use these as much as I can. In any event, I'm going to put all the screws back on that you saw I took off. I'm going to put the accelerator pump back in. I'll just use a thin screwdriver to push the roll pin back in on the accelerator pump, and then I will shoot a little update once I get that done. Okay, so here I go, just tightening these down. Always start these, by the way, the two long screws go in the back. Always start, when you're tightening things, start things off by hand. You're never going to strip a thread with your hand. And if you get resistance as you're starting to turn it in by hand, back it out and try again. But that's one thing that I can lesson learned over the years. Always start, whether it's a bolt or a nut, by hand. You aren't going to hurt anything or risk stripping it out if you're just finger tightening it. So I did this screw back here. You want to go in opposite sides. So I'll start tightening this bolt in the front a little bit, just gently. And I'll go over to this side a little bit. And you don't need to crank these things down. This is just pot metal, these air horns. So you want them snug, but they have lock washers and things on here. So no need to be overly tight. This isn't a component that's under stress. You want it tight enough so that the gasket seats, but you don't want to be here really wrenching on this and warping the air horn. You're going to have more problems. So I'm just tightening everything up loose to begin, and I will come back and tighten it more. So all of those screws are in. I'm going to go now and tighten it a little bit more. Do that. That, go to the other side. Again, I'm not tightening this very much. Notice where I'm putting my hand. I'm not putting my hand further out in the wrench and really pulling this, because you're going to exert far more torque by yanking on it way out here than you will just using your hand like this with the fingertips. You're not going to do any damage with this type of an approach. Think about it as though, you know, I'm trying to push a door open from the part of the door that's closest to the hinge. It's really hard to open that door, versus if I push at the edge of the door, it's a lot easier. A lot more torque out here than you have here. So this is a technique I use when I'm doing things that I don't want to over tighten. You can use a torque wrench, of course, but I've done this so many times by feel, and you kind of get to know it over time. You notice I'm not really wrenching on these screws either. I'm just making sure they're tight. So all of the top air horn screws are in. Now the two in the well. And this is where it comes in handy to have the magnetic screwdriver or magnetized one that you have. Just put that in and it's not going to fall off on you. And then it goes in the hole. One more. Put that on here. Okay, all those are in. Next, I'm going to put the secondary metering rods back in, but first I'm going to clean off the varnish on those. So I just put those in, put the screw on here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hook up the accelerator pump, and I'm going to try to start the car before I put the choke plate back in, because if I've done something wrong, I don't want to have spent all this time hooking this up. Now the car is going to be a little hard to start, admittedly, with no choke, but it is an almost 90-degree day here, so it should fire up. I will use a little starting fluid, and remember the float bowl in here is dry. There's no gas, so you're going to have to crank it, or you're going to have to use some starting fluid to prime the system and get, you know, some fuel into that chamber before this car is going to run. So I will do that, and I will come back. Okay, time for the secondary metering rod reinstallation. These just hook in here and they hang loose, so don't worry if you do this and they come off, you just push them back in. These also have a marking on them. These, it says CH, so you can change the type of metering rod and the taper and everything if you want, and the length. So this just goes in here and just kind of jiggle it a little bit. Might have to help it a little. And that goes back down in there. And there's the little screw for the top. After you've done this so many times, you get to know which screw goes where. But again, best tip is take a bunch of pictures if you're doing this the first time and label things. I mean, I know this screw is the secondary metering screw. It really doesn't fit anywhere else. But all right, so that's done. And really all I have left now are the screws for this choke pull off and the choke mechanism and the accelerator pump. So I may try starting this right now. I won't have an accelerator pump or a choke, but sometimes I like to do that just to make sure it's not going to flood out. It will be harder to start. You really can't do that on a 30-degree day unless you have somebody holding this closed to get it moving or to get it started. But you know, this is something that I can probably get going like this, and that way I can check to make sure everything I've done so far is good. So I'm probably going to do that, or I may install the accelerator pump, because that'll help with, you know, since I don't have a choke, this will squirt gas in there as I kind of pump the pedal once it's running, just to give it a bit richer mixture. So, but approaching the end. All right, so I've hooked the accelerator pump back up, and one thing that you'll see, there's two slots on the accelerator pump. This is the richer setting, this is the leaner setting. So I put it on the richer, which is where it was from the factory. But now you can see when you step on the gas, that activates the plunger. It's going to squirt gas in there once there's some gas in the float bowl, which there is not. You can, I'm just going to give it a few squirts of starting fluid. You could also use a squeeze bottle and put some gas in here. That'll go straight down into the float chamber. But this car will start up. Hopefully it doesn't flood out or have any issues, but we're going to find out. Okay, we'll give this a go. Unrehearsed. Now remember, this car is not going to start up and run completely smooth because it doesn't have the choke on. And I'm also missing a vacuum line from the air cleaner. But this is just a test to make sure it doesn't flood out and after it warms up, it should run pretty smooth. So we'll see what happens here. If this works, then I'll reconnect the choke and everything, and we'll continue. I would expect, by the way, for this to start and die probably a couple times, but let's see what happens. Well, I see no signs of flooding out so far, which is good. And it seems the accelerator pump is working, so that means the float bowl is getting some gas. Success. Running on its own power. No flooding. So I'm going to hook the choke back up now. It's running a little bit rough because these are jetted pretty lean and the motor's cold and there's no choke. This flap would normally be a little bit closed. You hear the motor smooth out when I do that. And kind of leans out a little bit when I take off. But that's normal, so I need to hook the choke back up. Success! Now just hook the air cleaner back up and you're done. Alright, it's all buttoned up. Now watch the end result. Not a shake. Working on these things and being successful is something that is really a pleasure. When you're not successful, it sucks, but that's going to happen. Just take your time. You have to redo it again. In this case, it worked out. Hope that video was informative for you or interesting as well.